Well, since it is Super Tuesday, we have an all-star super panel today.
Right.
We have Leslie Sanchez. She's a CBSN political contributor and a Republican strategist. Liz Plank is a senior correspondent and producer for Vox.com. She'll be hosting a weekly video series covering politics and the presidential campaign beginning this month. And Josh Holmes is the former chief of staff to Senator Mitch McConnell. Josh, so let's start with you. What are you looking for today?
Well, it's a big Super Tuesday, right? I mean, March Madness starts tonight.
That's right.
We're excited for it. Well, look, I think the polls have provided basically no mystery about what's going to happen on the top of the tickets here. I think Trump is going to have a pretty big night. Margins matter here a lot, and almost as importantly is who's finishing second in these primaries. Also, there's several states. You look at Alabama, Georgia, Texas, Tennessee, Vermont. They all have 20% thresholds, which is vitally important as these candidates are trying to collect delegates that they get to this. You look at a state like Texas, for example, that everybody's going to be looking at tonight. Will Ted Cruz win? I think most observers would say that he needs to win in order to continue. If he does win, however, where does Trump follow? Is that margin a big one, or is he close? And then almost as importantly as that is Marco Rubio at a 20% threshold where he's actually getting delegates out of Texas. So a lot of stuff out there. I think we'll be excited to sort of get more in depth about exactly what this all means.
Leslie, let me ask you, Donald Trump has been getting a lot of criticism lately, not just for what some people call the dodge over the weekend when he was asked whether he would disavow support from KKK and David Duke, but now it seems as if the Republican Party is almost in open revolt against Mr. Trump. I asked John Dickerson this morning if Mr. Trump does become the nominee, could we see the Republican Party coalescing around him? And he says his sources are saying probably not.
I agree with John, and that's really what is so unconventional. I mean, by any standard or any traditional measure, you would look at somebody who's done extraordinarily well, like Donald Trump, and say, okay, he's going to be the nominee. People get in line, start thinking about VPs, diversity, who's going to be on his plank, what kind of messages are going to move forward, and think more toward the general. That is the last thing anybody's thinking about right now. If anything, it's like the alternative game. What can they do? Not forget slowing the train. What are the other options now when you have governors coming out, senators coming out, that are not only staying on the sidelines, but now repudiating completely the idea of a Trump candidacy? It is a tremendous amount of tension. Not to mention, you look on social media, you have a lot of thought leaders, grasstops leaders we've talked about, who are just flat out at war with the idea of a Trump candidacy. And this is really going to be hard to bring back together.
Well, and Josh, your former boss, who was recently quoted in the New York Times, is telling incumbent Republicans to drop him like a hot potato. Hot rock. Well, either way, he didn't mince words.
You didn't say
right?
tamale.
Right.
That would have been for the Latinos. Just saying. So,
I mean, what's a strategy for Republican leadership going forward?
Well, strategy, I think, is at this point overstating it. This is a situation I think most people hope that they wouldn't find themselves in at this point in the nomination process. Whether we're at the end of it or at the beginning, I think tonight we find out more about what exactly that looks like. You know, Republicans down ticket are going to have a problem here, though. I mean, if you look at CNN had another poll out today that showed that literally the only Republican in the race that's not beating Hillary Clinton is Donald Trump. And every single candidate really suffers down the ballot. You're talking about some very important Senate races that literally means the control of the United States Senate and ultimately who's going to sit on the next Supreme Court justice. And all of these things, yeah, they're going to have to come up with a strategy on how to deal with that.
Well, because you factor that into just hearing from Speaker Ryan. Ryan, correct me if I'm wrong, but he has said that he will still support the eventual Republican nominee, correct? So how do you square that kind of language with also supporting Trump if he is the nominee?
The truth is, a lot of it kind of comes out in the wash. So we're going to say we're still several months away. We'll get through the summer, get through conventions, kumbaya. People are going to strike some deals. But there are two distinct things that have happened. One is this slow drip of support from white nationalist and white supremacist organizations that started in the fall, continued on talk radio, and now you have a flat-out David Duke saying, "Why don't you volunteer and go into the Trump headquarters? You will find like-minded individuals." All of that, including the robocalls from Iowa and New Hampshire, should have been repudiated extremely clearly a couple of months ago, and not now, and not kind of this like I have a foggy memory, a bad earpiece. That is not the kind of message that can move forward. And the second part is kind of exactly what you're talking about. This is a failure of leadership on the establishment side, insider baseball, so to speak, that never took care of this issue and bringing a party and a coalition and leadership against in terms of what the Republican Party should have been.
Well, the one thing I'll add to that just quickly, Vlad, is there is an obvious point of view here that I think Republican insiders, so to speak, are operating off of, which is there is nothing they're going to be able to do that's productive in terms of forming a primary that's looking at this as a very outsider coalition. I mean, we're talking about Donald Trump. If it wasn't Donald Trump, it was Ted Cruz, and they're running against Washington entirely.
Right.
When you have a bunch of senators that pop in and say, hey, wait, foul, I think it only reinforces the people who are supporting Trump and Cruz and the outsider anti-establishment vote.
So let's talk about that. Liz, you've been on the campaign trail. What are you hearing from the voters? What are people saying to you, both on the Republican side and the Democratic side?
People are angry. People are very angry, and we've seen, the support going to Bernie Sanders. And surprisingly, I think not a lot of people expected Hillary Clinton to have to mount a campaign against him. So there's clearly some disaffected voters on both sides, and I think the Republican Party has clearly undervalued Trump or thought he wouldn't be a threat, and I think it's kind of too little too late. That's why you're seeing sort of this intra-civil war coming out and sort of imploding for us to, before our eyes. But they are also not listening. I mean, Donald Trump is not a phenomenon in itself. He is supported by people. He is massive support on the Republican side. So the GOP is going to have to come to terms with that, and has to come to terms with who are their supporters and what do they stand for. And I'm not sure, the whole KKK, the earpiece, my memory's vague. Trump is a smart man, and I'm not sure that that is necessarily, I think it's a strategy.
Well, that's interesting. Sorry, go ahead, Julian.
No, I was just going to say, but it also speaks to a challenge for Hillary Clinton going forward, which is that you've seen this anger both from Donald Trump supporters, but also from white working class supporters of Bernie Sanders. And so the challenge for Hillary is to be able, to get those supporters from Bernie Sanders if she is the nominee.
But to do that, she has to sort of go left.
Them.
She has to go a little bit further left than she probably wanted to, and tie herself to President Obama, probably more in a way than she ever wanted to do, because Bernie's bringing up these issues that she was not expected to talk about.
Yeah, I mean, he brought her to the left, and he certainly was effective in doing that. And we saw, the exit polls coming out of South Carolina. A lot of voters, their most important issue, or their most important sort of priority, was continuing the legacy of President Obama. And Hillary Clinton has, especially recently, really made that her issue.
It's interesting to me that, she probably expected to talk about national security and her time as Secretary of State. When you see what the voters are saying is most important to them, obviously the economy, maintaining some of those platforms that President Obama had, national security, unlike the Republican side, falls fifth of the pack,
And will that sort of advantage Hillary Clinton if she is the nominee and Donald Trump is the nominee, which it's looking to shape up like that might be the case? Is his inflammatory language of bringing back waterboarding and blowing
Worse than
up
waterboarding, he said,
I don't even know. Most of the language I don't even know if I can use.
I don't know how,
Well, committing war crimes, basically, is what he was talking
he said
about.
He
When
was
he's going after terrorist families.
So this is really interesting, and I want everybody's take on this. The idea that that a lot of people are starting to say that Donald Trump, the rise of Donald Trump, is also partly because of some of the platforms that certain Republicans have held over the last several of years. That a lot of this dog whistle stuff, talking about taking out the families of terrorists, that is a war crime. That's something that Donald Trump has said, and people cheer that. Is that what people? Do you guys feel that that's true? That Donald Trump is a creation of some of the sort of the dog whistle politics that have been utilized in the past couple of years with the Republicans?
I don't think Donald Trump is a creation of anybody other than himself at this stage. I mean, we have an electorate that is extremely anxiety-ridden on both the Republican and Democratic side. So I think trying to pin the tail on either a donkey or an elephant here would be pretty difficult to do. But that being said, look, some of the issues that he is pushing, particularly immigration, are things that Republican leadership over the last 3 or 4 years has attempted to try to downplay. I mean, you look at all of the discussion following the 2012 election of how to do this better, right? How to put a nominee in a place where they could be more competitive in a general election. I think virtually every Republican leader looked at each other and said, it's really important that we try to figure out how to communicate the immigration issue a lot better than we are. Yet here we are again.
And that's, one of what Bernie Sanders and Donald Trump are tapping into among white working class is, if you look at the last 20 years, where has the middle class gone? What have wages looked like? And who is to blame? And so for someone like Donald Trump to come out and say, okay, well, we have to blame illegal immigration.
Right.
These people are taking away our jobs. And if you look at Bernie Sanders, he says, we blame Wall Street. And so those are the two forces that are coming into play here.
They're very similar,
Yeah.
too. And if you've looked at some of these disaffected Democrats, they're very much like, I could have gone either way. I could have gone Bernie Sanders or I could have gone Donald Trump. The one disagreement I would have on this is I think this is something that's been percolating for over a generation. I would go back to 1992. A lot of these are Ross Perot voters. We cannot discount that. And they were willing to take the whole thing down just to prove a point. That was 19 million people in 1992. These are disaffected. You're talked about. Disaffected is kind of a loose term, but swing voters very much. They're moving back and forth, working class individuals. They have a little bit of a protectionism, but they're very upset that the United States has fallen behind competitively in wages, in scale, in education, in opportunity. They're upset about that immigration reform. Why wasn't it done? They don't want to get into the weeds about, well, we tried and we had poison pills and all this stuff. It didn't happen. So this is a debate and a contest about leadership style, about somebody with such sharp elbows that they fundamentally believe he can change the dynamic and fix a broken system.
Well, can I ask, I want to turn to Marco Rubio. If he does not win any state tonight, what exactly is his path? Is the path all the way to the convention? What kind of arguments can he now make to stay in and say, okay, I'm the person who can take on Trump?
Yeah, I think he's got the same path as everybody else does, except for Donald Trump at this point, which is to try to amass as many delegates as he possibly can tonight. And he gets a fair number of second-place finishes. He's going to do just as well as everybody else is, regardless of whether he ends up winning a state or not. I think his path also looks at the March 15 states. You look at Florida, his home state, as a winner-take-all, massive delegate state, as really kind of the one that he's got to win.
And he's not polling well against Donald Trump in his home state.
It's hard to tell how these things shake out after a day like Super Tuesday, however. I mean, we may have fewer candidates tomorrow than we do today. We may have fewer candidates in the course of the week that leads us up to the March 15 states. And so I don't think we can look at polling today to actually give us an idea of where we're going to end up in the middle of March, but certainly Marco Rubio is hoping that he does well in Florida.
What kind of pressure do you think John Kasich and his guys are under right now to not be a spoiler? I mean, how?
Well, John Kasich has John Weaver, who ran McCain's campaign. He's a very tough guy. He's not going to really feel any pressure in that sense. I think he's going to focus on Ohio, which is really what's interesting about Donald Trump finishing the evening. Forget Super Tuesday, I've got this wrapped up. He's going directly in his backyard. So there's a direct threat. And it's really kind of taking out candidates one at a time. These candidates have to win their home states. Ted has to Cruz has to win, Texas, obviously. Florida is the firewall for Marco Rubio. You can't make a truly competitive argument for a general if you can't carry your own state, which is such an important swing state. It's such a diverse economic one as well.
Remind me, when is Ohio? Is that
It's March 15th.
March 15th,
okay,
right?
So
both Kasich and Rubio conceivably could last until March 15th because they could come out of here today and say, look, I'm not expected to be competitive in any of these states, but just wait till you get to my home state.
Right, but I think there's going to be mounting pressure for them to be, or for someone to step down, because at this point, the divide and the fact that the race is kind of a five-man race at the moment is actually giving Trump more fuel to keep going. So if he does very well today, I think we're going to see mounting pressure from especially the Republican establishment for them to step down.
You agree?
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And I think you're already seeing the anxiety rising at a really high level with both the conservative thought leader group and your more establishment politician group. And I think all of them would like to see us get down to one candidate that is ultimately the anti-Trump candidate. And right now, you just don't have that, and we're splitting it three ways.
That again speaks to insider leadership dysfunction, and I can't say that enough, because if you look at the fact that Ted Cruz was rising in Texas because he went against the establishment, he really kind of perfected his formula. Then he added data to it and micro-targeting. No one saw Donald Trump kind of on the ascension, and that really took a lot of steam out of him. But he specifically is somebody who went against all the phone calls, all the governors calling him, all the political powers, the money folks that said, do not run, it's not your time. And he said, I'm going to run anyway. I was there in those meetings with him. So the thought that they're going to be able to be more effective now that he's the U.S. Senator and polling so well and he may win his own state, it just don't see it happening.
Look, all of those same calls were done with Marco Rubio, too, right? I mean, that's the Jeb Bush machine was begging to try to keep him out of this race, and everybody made those calls, please don't run.
Please don't do it.
And now I think there's going to be a lot of calls going the other way. Hey, just hold on just a little bit longer.